Chapter 5, The Raiders. The trench raids were a Canadian invention. Until the Canadians came along, nobody, not the British, not the French, not even the Germans, had considered the possibility of raiding one another's lines between major offensives. The first trench raid was staged in the Ypres salient on the last day of February 1915 by the Princess Patz, 6 months before the Canadian Corp was formed. 100 men took part in a smash-and-grab attack that destroyed 30 yards of German trenches. 5 Canadians were killed in the fight, 11 more wounded. But the credit for developing the trench raid into a sophisticated concomitant of battle is generally reserved for Victor Odlum, who in November 1915 commanded the 7th British Columbia Battalion. His was one of 2 units that carried out a successful double attack that month across the Douvre River. It was the first in the Corps' experience, and it became a model for the scores of raids that followed. The front was quiet at the time. Odlum's troops were bored and cold. It is said that somebody suggested a raid on the German trenches simply to relieve the monotony. Odlum seized upon the idea and made it his own. The raid was meticulously planned. The 170 volunteers rehearsed for 10 days, and the results were overwhelmingly successful. The Canadians took the Germans by surprise and suffered only 2 casualties. Victor Wentworth Odlum was a curious specimen. The men in his brigade were infuriated with his teetotalism. They called him Pea Soup Odlum because when neighboring brigades were warming their bellies and stiffening their resolves with a daily tot of rum, they had to be content with mugs of broth. That finally ended in February 1917, when tensions began to rise over the coming battle. Odlum himself later regretted the Puritan strain inherited from his Methodist father. A missionary's son, born in Cobourg, Ontario, schooled in Tokyo and Vancouver, and shuffled around the world, he'd been brought up to believe that strong drink, card games, and the theater were all devices of the devil. Since these were among the chief diversions of the soldier, it is possible to believe that Odlum fought a personal war within himself, especially in the mess, where he was always a little apart from his fellow officers, never quite one of the gang. They called him Old Lime Juice, and more affectionately, Victor of Vancouver. Like his staff officers, a lawyer, a politician, a miller, a mayor, Odlum was a militiaman, a civilian in uniform, whose interests were far broader than those of the regulars who confined themselves to polo, pick-sticking, or ragging in the mess. Odlum had studied political science at the University of Toronto before becoming a reporter on a Vancouver newspaper. Such were his abilities that he rose in 3 years to become its editor. By the time war broke out, he was owner and editor of the Vancouver Star, but that did not consume all his energies. On the side, he sold bonds and insurance.